and turn things over to our presenter, Nick Ryan. Welcome, Nick. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Arlen. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about restorative practices, justice. I'll use those terms kind of interchangeably today during the presentation, but I have about 50 slides or so that I'm going to kind of cover. But like Arlen said, put questions in the chat. I think that's a great way to learn, is by asking questions, and I'd be more than happy as I talk about the implementation process and my various sites and kind of our journey through this work together. I'm going to share my screen with you at this time. Arlen, could you just let me know if that is being seen and we can kind of get going? I just want to make sure everyone can see that.
Yes, the screen's coming through perfect. Thanks, Nick.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll start with the introduction. We're going to talk about implementing restorative justice in schools and then learning some practical strategies to build strong, healthy relationships. And as we kind of start, I feel like as educators, we always want to talk about building relationships. And I feel like this is a common thing that I hear when I hire teachers or different personnel, APs, is I build healthy, strong relationships. And I think for me, being able to articulate how we actually build those relationships is sometimes tricky. So I think we're going to have some ways where we can kind of look at that within the schools and the systems that we work in. So we'll get through that. We'll talk a little bit today about myself, my journey, and intro to restorative practices, how I kind of got into this work. We'll talk about the social discipline window, which I think is a key concept when talking about social restorative justice and restorative practices. We'll talk about the different practitioner styles. There's really 4 major styles of practitioner as a teacher, and just how we deal with things in everyday life. And then the organizational change window, and then the 9 affects of emotion. And we'll talk about the continuum a little bit, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. And I really want some time at the end for questions because I think that's a great way to learn, like I said previously. A little bit about me. I got into this work about 5 years ago. I was at about a 800, 750 student middle school. We were having some severe behavioral challenges. The superintendent and I met along with our director of teaching and learning. We said, how are we going to combat this issue? We had about 2,400 major referrals that we had managed that year, and we needed to make a change. But I'm a middle school principal. It's kind of where I've lived the last 15 years of my career. I love the middle school students. I just love that age group. And so that's where I've spent the primary of my career. I'm currently enrolled in a doctoral and superintendent licensure program, with my dissertation being surrounding exclusionary practices and how there isn't a lot of support of those and how those work. Yes, we need them at times for different things, but looking at ways where we can maybe prevent some of the things from happening prior to even getting to that point. So I taught math and ELA at the middle school level. I was an assistant principal for 6 years. Primarily at the middle school, but also at the high school level. I'm currently a principal at a 650 plus student middle school. I've worked in different parts of the country. I've worked in Wisconsin and in Wyoming. I went to UW La Crosse for my undergraduate degree, Madison for my master's degree, and I'm currently at UW Oshkosh, all in Wisconsin, for my superintendent's licensure. So my journey with restorative justice kind of started in 2018-19. A little before that, I had pockets of it within the confines of my administrative career, but really dived into this work in 2018-19 when I was an assistant principal at that middle school that we were referring to earlier. The year before, they had 2017-18, there were about 2,400 major referrals. We needed to change. Our solution was to make our school more restorative. We didn't really know what we were diving into. We kind of just said we saw some great things in other schools that had kind of dove into this work and did some of these things. So we're like, all right, let's test it out. So how that worked was we took a small group to the IARP training. This was in Evanston, Illinois, International Institute of Restorative Practices. This was in 2018. We took about 10 staff with us to the initial training. We brought back the staff. We started implementing pockets of it within the school to see how we liked it, to see how the kids were responding. We started with some community circles, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Began the conversation with the rest of the staff on, hey, this restorative justice work is really cool. It's about building these strong relationships with students and then being able to repair harm when things are damaged. We took 5 staff members back then that same year in November to become train the trainers by the IARP as well. And I will reference the IARP because that's who did a lot of my formal training. I'm lucky right now in my current district to be working with the National Equity Project, and we have a consultant, Rudy Bankston, who's phenomenal in the restorative justice work, and he's taught me a lot of great things as well. But I think my basis was in the IARP on kind of where I learned everything, and then I'm constantly trying to refine my practice as I move forward. After we did that, train the trainers, we trained our full staff that following year, that same year, but in 2019, different calendar year in February. We trained everyone from our custodial staff to our paraprofessionals, to our teachers, to our secretaries. Every clerical, everyone in our building was trained that would even remotely work with kids or see kids, because we thought it was that important to be able to do that. And kind of what we saw was after the implementation, after the first year, we had decreased our referrals by 30%. The way our conversations with kids are different, some of our systems were different. It was just a really, really, really cool thing. And after year 2, it dropped another 10%, totaling a 43% decrease after a 2-year period, which was remarkable. Our staff did a phenomenal job of buying in, which wasn't easy at first because of a new initiative, a new thing. And like what I always told my staff is, it's not an initiative, it's how we talk to kids. And I know people say that, and that's always going to be a point of contention in schools, is anytime something new gets brought up, it's like, well, we've already done this or whatever else. But with this, it's like, how do we say things to kids? How are we handling situations, and how do we get better? And so the staff buy-in was really due to the fact that it was working. They noticed the difference in their classrooms, in the hallways, in our lunchrooms, and everything in between. So, and then what we noticed was, well, when things were getting better behaviorally, kids were more apt to be able to learn. And so in this case, they were increasing their achievement. We saw that as well. So it was kind of a twofold thing. We wanted to make sure the behaviors were under control, so then we could actually teach in the classrooms, and we were able to see that pretty quickly. So some of the organizational changes that I wanted to touch on that we started was, we started looking at some of the systems in place. And one of the things we looked at to become more restorative was our morning attendance policy. And when I first got there, there would be a line of kids waiting for like 10 to 20 minutes in the morning to get a red stamped pass that said they were late. They'd walk into their first hour. The teacher would say, well, why are you late? And for a 6th through 8th grader, 99% of the time getting to school late was not their fault, but we were kind of hammering them 2 different times, and it just wasn't a good situation. So we kind of tweaked our attendance policy to more of a soft start, where kids were able to come in. We'd ask them if they needed breakfast, ask them how their day was going. Thanks for coming to school. We get them in their class. We still held them accountable to the attendance, but it wasn't right then and there. We wanted to get them into school, get them into the classrooms, get them learning, and then we would address it later at a time that was more appropriate, where we could kind of have those conversations. Discipline conversations turned very differently. Students would get into a physical altercation, for example, instead of right away, here's your, suspension, here's your ticket. We'll talk to you when you get back. It was, hey, we know that something happened. We know that there's going to be a suspension. We know that there potentially could be a police citation, but when you come back to school, if the damage isn't repaired, you're still coming back into the same classes together. So how do we make that right? And we'll talk about ways in which we did that. Conversations surrounding data. Every month we talked about data. Where was it where was our discipline occurring? What days, what times? It was really important for us to know so that we could try and alleviate some of that and fix what we were doing in those systems. And then 2 things that really for me are what restorative practices and restorative justice are all about, and maybe people don't always think about this, is taking care of the whole child in regards to what we're doing in schools. And what I mean by that is we implemented in both middle schools that I've been a part of, the Panther Den, when I was in one of the schools that I kind of started this work, and then now at my current school, the Cartridge Cupboard. And what that is it's a place where students can go. It's extremely confidential. They walk in, they're able to get hygiene products, food, clothes, school supplies, anything they need. It's free. Any student can use it at any time. And it's It's a non-invasive way. We partner with community organizations, but it's a way of saying we want to take care of you. We care about you. yes, we're going to talk about behavioral issues and everything else. We want the school to run efficiently, but first we have to let kids know that we care about them as human beings. And that was kind of our first step in that process, kind of working in tandem with all the issues and all the things regarding restorative practice and restorative work. And then we started implementing community circles in all our classrooms, piloting it once or twice a week. And then teachers really kind of got on the idea and started doing it more and more. And then as administrators, giving them time within that, 55, 60, 80-minute blocks, whatever the school is running, to be able to say, no, we think it's that important to build relationships with kids. You're going to take away from some curriculum time because we think it's that important that it's going to pay dividends later on. And we did see that.
Nick, we had a question come in
okay.
related to that from Bridget. She asked, how did you hold them accountable for attendance?
So one of the things we did with attendance was we had like my dean, myself, our student services department, we would go to different team times, and we ran a house model at our middle school, and we would look at our like high flyers, and then we would bring them in and they'd have meetings, and we'd try and get their parents involved, knowing that that's difficult sometimes, and finding out the why behind whatever the reason why they weren't coming to school. Sometimes it was transportation issues. Sometimes there was no one at home to wake them up. Sometimes there was intrinsic or lack of intrinsic motivation to even get to school. So we had to find out the why behind that. And then we were able to problem solve that as a team. It's not always easy. Attendance is a bear for almost every school district that I've ever been a part of. But I think that collaboration, we had a truancy abatement officer that really bought into the restorative work, and it was giving rides to kids and rewarding them and setting up programs like, if you make it to school for 5 days in a row on time, we're going to get to this point, and 10 days in a row on this time. And then it's kind of depending on the situation. During COVID, when things were a little crazy, I drove students to school in one of our district's vans, just picking them up and getting them to and from school during our different stages of, when we were hybrid or fully in person. So it's getting creative. I don't think there's a one size fits all, but it's just implementing and doing the best you can with the resources that you have.
Thank you, Nick.
Yep, absolutely.
A follow-up from Dwayne is, do you give detentions for tardies and too many absences?
So I've been in schools that do that, yes, because that's what our handbook said. But we've also had a lot of luck with like other sorts of restoring of the school. For example, I guess one of the things we did in Watertown was we had like an after school program that the students had to go to, but it wasn't like a detention where you'd sit there and just you would have to make up the time, but it was more like building a relationship with a staff member. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm just going to sit in this room and potentially not work and put my head down on a desk. Like, we tried to make it more like interactive. Whether that was always the case or not, I don't know, but that was our goal, and to have staff members in there that would work with students. I ran a Friday school for 2 hours on a Friday in place of like an in-school suspension, where kids would sit with me for 2 hours, and we'd go through different things and build restorative kind of pieces. If they missed the Friday school, then they would unfortunately be in school on that following Monday, but then we would implement that Friday school that next week. So they'd still have to do the Friday school, but they would save themselves a day in school if they actually showed up and came and participated in that. So that was just one of the things we've done. The thing with restorative justice and restorative practice is it doesn't eliminate consequences. And I think that's a common misconception, is we're going to just not punish kids. And that's not true. You need to hold kids accountable, but you also have to understand, like, it's a people first business, and we're going to hold you accountable. You might get X and Y, Z consequence, but we also got to welcome you back into the community where the damage was done.
Nick, there was another post in there from Calvin about, are you able to be certified for becoming a restorative justice member? I don't know if that's about IIRP.
Yeah, you actually become a train the trainer through IIRP. I believe the initial training was like 4 or 5 days, where you like learn all of the things, and I'll touch on some of those things today, not like the depth or the activities that you would get through the IIRP, but just kind of a quick snapshot. And then going back, you actually go through like more of the science behind everything. The IIRP does a really nice job of walking you through that. And then you actually end up teaching a lesson in restorative justice and doing some really cool things. So I thought in all my years, and even like going through like school and everything else, that was one of the most powerful trainings that I did, because it made you question a lot of the maybe things that you had done previously. But I think like IRP is phenomenal. And then I think it's always good to refine, they have a great, informational, the science behind all of it, but then to keep refining and changing systems, which is something they don't touch on all the time in their trainings, but like the community and restorative circles is something you do a phenomenal job of talking about during those trainings. So yep, you can be a trainer. You can actually get a master's degree from the IARP through some of their programming. This is just an example of our Culture Covered in my current district, where we partnered with some organizations. We literally got this, like we had the idea, I was like, hey, we want to get this rocking and rolling in October of 2021, and it's already fully stocked. We have a chest freezer in there. There's hygiene products on the side that you can't see, clothes, shoes, a plethora of snacks on the right-hand side there, and then a bunch of canned goods and easy made meals out of the picture as well. But it's been a really cool partnership with our community. And once they know that the need exists, they were really apt to be able to donate and take care of our kids. And all the communities that have implemented this and have been the same way. And it's not affluent communities necessarily. It's very like, Midwestern towns that just want to take care of their kids and take care of the schools. And we're very fortunate to have the community partnerships that we do. This is something that when I worked with the National Equity Project, we kind of worked through the 7 core assumptions and what we believe to be true. And our district team and my current district talk about these 7 things. And it's hard because it's very difficult in some of the work we do to be able to hold all these 7 core assumptions to have value and truth. But in order to really buy into the restorative justice world and buy into this work, these 7 core assumptions have to be kind of a pivotal. We believe that this is true, and we believe that we can agree to all of these things. It doesn't mean it's not going to be difficult at times, but it's just something that is a deep rooted within the restorative justice system. And it's that number 1, the true self in everyone is good, wise, and powerful. The world is profoundly interconnected. All human beings have a deep desire to be in a good relationship. All human beings have gifts, and everyone is needed for what they bring. Everything we need is to make a positive change is already here. Human beings are very holistic in nature, and we need practices to build habits of living from the core self. And I know being a middle school principal, especially on like Friday afternoons in May, it's hard to believe in all of these things all the time, but in order to do the work, it is something that I think is truly important for the staff to invest in, and then for as leaders to be able to really own. So now we're going to dive in. I've told you a little bit about my journey with it, our teams, and some of the things we've done, but this is going to get into the nuts and bolts of the the practice. We'll talk about what a fundamental hypothesis is from the IARP. We'll talk about the social discipline window and what fair process means and what it is, the psychology of affect, and then we'll talk a little bit about the restorative practices continuum. And this is a lot of information very, very quickly, but I just think it's important to go through so that people have an idea of the work, and if they're interested, to be able to dive more into these trainings, because you're not going to get everything you need to get in a 50-minute webinar. So the context, when we look at this, what are schools and community-based organizations about today? That's like, we have to put that into context. What are we about? What has changed in our field in the last 30 years? Why are schools, community-based organizations today the most important institutions? And what are the challenges of working with your constituents, students, families, clients? And what do the most challenging students or youth have in common? And what's going to make a difference in their lives? Those are the things we have to be clear about before we talk about anything else. And then, how important is it that your constituents understand where you're coming from and what you're all about? What I mean by this is, when I have a kid in my office that knows he made a mistake or she made a mistake, they have to understand that my job is to make the school safe, and to make sure that that kids are in classrooms and they're learning. And if they know that and they understand the why, students are a lot more receptive to whatever consequence or whatever the next step is. And so, in other words, the rationale for your practice, what do you formally or informally? What I do in my office with students, what I do in my hallway with students, whether it's formally or informally, when I'm building relationships by walking through the halls, asking kids about their day, giving knuckles, making up goofy handshakes, or when I'm in my office running a restorative circle with two kids that just got into a fight, like what we do matters. And I think it's very important to know that when kids know where you're coming from and the why behind it, they're much more apt to believe in the next part of the process and to feel good about what happened, even if it means they do get a consequence or something happens that normally would be punitive in nature. We'll talk a little bit about the explicit framework rationale. You have to be certain about your practice. We have to know that our programs are in place for the right reasons. We have to focus on the conversations. How we talk to kids is everything. We're going to talk about in the social discipline window. There's really 4 ways everyone can handle a situation. You can either do something to someone, you can do something for someone, you don't do anything at all, and you kind of are like, I'm not doing anything, or you can do something with somebody. And with somebody is kind of the goal of today's webinar, is to understand that we have to do things with people in order to get to where we need to get to. We have to focus on what works. We need to be clear about whose role is what, our responsibilities, values, assumptions, and outcomes. So the whole idea of restorative practice is that human beings are more happy, more cooperative, more productive, more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when people in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. And I think, like I just mentioned, like when kids know the why and they know that it's Mr. Ryan doesn't just like hate me, that's why he's suspending me for getting into that fight. Mr. Ryan has a job to do. He needs to get to school safe. He wants me to come back into the school. Otherwise, he wouldn't be having me repair the relationship with the kid I just got in a fight with. And I know Mr. Ryan doesn't hate me because of all the positive interactions we've had to that point. I just made a poor choice, and I need to kind of restore that in order to get right with the community, because the community is so strong. I want to be back in that community. What is the goal? Develop community and manage conflict and tensions by repairing harmony, restoring relationships. Like I just said, when things go wrong, and I tell my staff and my students, I'm like, we run a school of over, between staff, kids, everyone in our building, it's over 750, almost 800 people in a building. Things are going to happen. So by us being a community, we have to realize what we're going to do and how we're going to repair things when they do happen, and kind of tackle those things appropriately. So if you forget everything I said up to this point or listen to nothing else after this point, this would probably be the best thing you could hear. This is kind of what set my staff really bought into this originally in my previous district, and then this year in my current school district, is this really, really, really important concept of the social discipline window. High control, high support. And you have to have both. It does not work if you have high control and low support. It doesn't work if you have high support and low control. It has to be a combination of both. You're not always going to live in that top quadrant, but that's our goal. And what I talked about earlier is if you have high control but low support, that is a punitive practitioner, and we'll talk about what that means. That's someone that's doing things to you. If you have low support and low control, those people don't care. They're just going to ignore things. And you have that high support. I really want to help you, but I maybe don't have, a lot of expectations or control. You're going to be in that permissive. And then if I have both, that's kind of where we want to live most of the time. That would be that restorative or with category. Now, I give this example with my staff all the time. It's September. I have a no hat, no hood rule at our school. I ask a kid, hey, can you please take down your hood or please take down your hat? That conversation may look very different in February or March, right before spring break, when I've asked that same student 4,000 times to please take down your hood or hat, and it's not happening. So it's easy to fall into these other quadrants at different points in the year, or when you're having a bad day or whatever else. But it's very important to be mindful of where you are in each of those, to just be better and more reflective of yourself for kids. So we talked about action. We're going to talk about action and reaction and kind of the principles of each of the practitioners. The first one is that punitive practitioner. And as a teacher, you know, prior to becoming an administrator, and I can still consider myself a teacher, I've fit all these styles throughout my career. I don't like to admit that, but this is a, you know, time when your tone of voice is blaming or accusatory, you lack of support in your directions, you notice, you know, what's going wrong more than you accept, you know, praise what's going right. You want immediate compliance. You want really high standards. I often hear, well, this didn't happen 25 years ago. Those types of, you know, things that I, you know, here within the confines of different schools that I've worked in, very ordered, but sometimes our students are anxious. They, you know, don't know how to act. It may be short-term compliance, but not going to last the entire, you know, year. There's going to be issues. It's stressful on the teacher because they have to keep everything so orderly that sometimes it's just not healthy, and it can, you know, cause a negative classroom atmosphere. So as I go through these, you know, I picture myself, and at times when I was in this category and it wasn't a good thing, and I needed to kind of bounce out of it to make sure I was more effective for my students. The permissive practitioner, this is someone that is very warm and supportive, but there isn't maybe a lot of limit setting. If the school rule says no cell phones, but if you want to use it to listen to music or you want to use it to text your mom, that's okay. Where it can focus on effort and de-emphasize quality. This is more like I tell, you know, staff, this is when we want to be the kid's friend rather than the educator, the person that needs to hold them accountable, and could potentially make excuses for others' behavior. What happens in this type of style is students feel like they're supported, but sometimes causes a chaotic or out of control classroom setting. It's hard to pull students back in once you've kind of set this type of classroom up, or school up for that matter. They don't feel secure. Usually the quality of work isn't as good. It's anxious and it's stressful on the teacher as well. In the neglectful practitioner style, this is the worst in my opinion, because it's they don't care. They don't care what they're doing. They don't care what the students are doing. They ignore things. They're throwing out videos, worksheets. They miss warning signs of things that we need to kind of get on top of. Students will withdraw. This is the category we don't want anyone in, because I think even with the permissive and with the punitive, we can draw some of the positives and get to the restorative, but with this one, it's very difficult because neither one is there. And then finally, where we want to live, right? Engaging content delivery, clear and written objective goals. We're using affective language. We're collaborating, and we're doing all these things that promote high outcomes, high student achievement. Kids are feeling positive. You're feeling good about yourself as a teacher. One of the things that I like to give as an example when I go through this, and so I like to give this to my staff, is when I say, all right, let's look at the social discipline model. Let's forget everything about education, okay? Let's just look at a real life. You're in your house with your spouse, and your spouse is supposed to be, it's their turn to do the dishes. There's 4 ways you can handle that. I can do the dishes for them. That's like, you know, the permissive. I'm just going to do it, and they, you know, whatever, they didn't have to do it, whatever. I can just ignore it and let the dishes pile up. That's that neglectful. I can say, hey, it's your turn, do the dishes. That's me being punitive to them. Or I sit and I say, hey, you wash, I'll dry. And that's that kind of example I give. And we have those examples throughout the course of our, you know, our days and how we handle situations. So to start, I like to kind of give a non-education example before you dive in, just so people know that it links to all portions of their life. It isn't just a school philosophy. Restorative justice and restorative practices has been used in indigenous cultures for centuries. It's not something new, but this kind of linking it all together and kind of putting this in perspective, you know, like places like the IRP or institutions like them does help kind of sum it up so it's a little more easily, you know, transferred. So this idea of fair process, and I think this is extremely important, is individuals are most likely to trust and cooperate freely with systems, whether they themselves win or lose by those systems, when fair process is observed. And this I see every single day. If a student gets in trouble for something, but they know that it was a fair, they had their voice, they were able to tell their side of the story. There was a clear-cut path to what happened and why. And I will say this to kids all the time, you understand why this is happening? Yes. And 95% of the time I get that response if we do things correctly. There's always going to be times in our course of our jobs where things aren't going to go well, and the kids are going to say, nope, I didn't do it. This is, bogus, whatever. There's always going to be times that happens. But when we do things in a manner like this, I would say 99% of the time we've had a lot of really, really good luck with this and this idea of fair process. It builds trust, cooperation, drives performance. Knowledge sharing. I have so many examples of students where they have felt like, no, I'm going to own what I like. After we've kind of started this whole process and done these things, it's like, hey, did you do this? Yeah, I did it. And I'm willing to take the fall for it because I understand that, Mr. Ino or Miss Phillips, my assistant principal, is going to be able to take care of me. And it's going to be like, yes, we're going to get through it together. I made a mistake. We're going to make it right. But I want to make sure I'm back in the community. I'm back in good graces because it is a place where I want to be. The organizational change window, it's very similar to the social discipline window. High pressure, the pressure high-low is on the left and the support's on the bottom. And just kind of the same sort of thing, that 2 not with 4, and kind of if we're going to put a lot of pressure, we need to provide a lot of support. If we're not, then you can see all those things that occur. But it's just very important to kind of see that it happens in all facets of our jobs. So continuing on with action reaction, the 9 affects. The Institute does a really, really nice job of talking about the 9 affects of emotions. One of the things that I noticed when I looked at this, I was like, it's kind of a bummer that there's so many negative affects and only a couple positives. But you can kind of see there the dismay, anger, rage, fear, terror, disgust, distress, anguish, shame, humiliation, that neutral one of like that surprise, startle, and then the positive effects of interest, excitement, and then the enjoyment and joy. So kind of a bummer, I think, that we only get 2 kind of positive ones and we have way more negative, but I think these kind of sum up the 9 affects that of emotions that we see through people in all facets of life. One of the things that is kind of an important part to talk about too is this compass of shame, and it kind of talks about what happens when someone offends or does something to another person. And one of the things that the Institute of Restorative Practices does is they call it an offender. And I did this for 3, 4, or 5 years. And when I was working with Rudy in the National Equity Project, he told me, he's like, well, offender is a label. And anytime we label anything, it's not good. So instead of an offender, that's just the student who, committed the offense, but they're not an offender. The offender means that they're going to be an offender forever, or they're not a victim. They were maybe the person that was, the victim in that situation, or the person that was victimized. So that was something I had to kind of change about my practice going through this, because the label is important too, to not do that. The compass of shame talks about the withdrawal. You attack yourself, attack the self. I'm worthless, I'm no good, whatever. I'm just going to avoid the issue, or I'm going to lash out at someone else because I don't know how to handle my own emotions. And all these kind of have their, negative effects. Each one has kind of a different negative effect. With the withdrawal, you can see isolation, running and hiding. And we know students that kind of use this strategy. Avoidance, I'm going to deny it. I'm going to abuse, substances, or I'm going to seek some thrill as a distraction to what I'm really struggling with. With the attack other, I'm going to turn the tables, blame someone else. I'm going to lash out verbally or physically. And then the attacking self, I'm going to put down. It's going to be a bad situation for me, because I'm just going to beat myself up over it. So those are kind of the compass of shame, and very quickly talking about that. This is extremely important when talking about the 2 types of shame. So there's stigmatizing and reintegrative. Stigmatizing is saying, we're not going to let you back in. We're labeling you. You're a bad person. How could you ever do that? Oh yeah, he was the one that did that thing in 6th grade. We're just done with him. The offender is pushed out of the community and encouraged like a criminal subculture, because the students can never feel like they're coming back into the community in which they harmed. And students do things that it's sometimes very, very difficult to want to bring them back into the community. But it's very important that we don't just label them and push them out, because we still have, you know, an obligation to make sure that we're teaching kids and doing the best we can to get them back into the community that we hopefully built up, so that they don't want to harm. Reintegrative shame is kind of the opposite of that. We're not happy with what you did, and that's okay. Like, you're going to have a consequence, but we're not going to push you out of the community. You're still part of us, but we need to figure this out, because it wasn't okay what you did. And we need to reject the act, but not the person. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about, you're not a victim. You maybe you're a person that was victimized. You're not the offender, but maybe you're the person that committed an offense. So looking at those things and then finding ways to get them back into the community when things happen. Responding to shame. This is extremely important. Listen to what people have to say. Being present. Put your cell phone away. Close your computer. Be there in the moment. Reflect on what has caused the shame feeling. Like, why are you feeling this way? And then talking about that. You have to acknowledge people's feelings, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. How I may feel about how you feel maybe is not like if someone gets into a physical altercation, they feel bad for themselves. I may not feel like that's a good feeling for them to have, but it's also not my place to be in that position to tell them that they should be feeling one way or the other. But that may not, change, they're still going to have a consequence for that. But how do we then get them back into the community? And then encouraging them to talk about their experience. I think that's extremely important. More kids can open up, and this only happens if they feel like they have a relationship with you. If kids don't feel like they have a relationship with you, they won't open up. And one of the things we started doing in our school is doing a staff survey, where we would making sure all students had at least one trusted staff member that they felt connected to. When we started doing this, we noticed a huge kind of draw into, okay, we have 20 kids that don't have someone that they feel like they can go to if something's wrong. That's not okay. That's a problem. How are we going to fix that? So just ideas that I'm kind of spitting off that I'm going quick, I know, but it's all very important stuff, because I know I only have about 5 minutes before I want to take some questions. This is kind of the continuum. It starts with the affective statements, then it goes to the affective questions, small conversations with students, a circle, and then a formal conference. Affective statements, they set boundaries, provide feedback, teach empathy. Examples: I feel glad when, I feel mad when. We've all heard of these. I feel scared when, that I statement. Affective, you can do this activity with the staff when you're being trained. All these things that I'm talking about, we've kind of worked with our team at my current district to kind of go through. Our admin team has done it. Our universal access team has done it. And then the school that I'm, serve in has done it as well. We get into restorative questions. This is like two students get into a physical altercation, they get their consequence, but when they come back, we're going to have to fix this. So they're open-ended questions. They come right from the IARP. They allow individual space to explore issues in a non-threatening way. Both students have to be ready to do this. This isn't something you force on them. You have individual conversations with them. Do you want to do a restorative circle? Is this something you want to repair the damage? Are you in a good spot to do that? You assess the situation. If it's going poorly, you stop the circle. You address the past, present, future. It helps to achieve that fair process and hopes to change the behavior in a positive way, and just shows sometimes how the students are affecting others, and sometimes they don't know who they're all affecting. The restorative questions are listed there. You always ask I always like to ask the questions to the victim and then to the offender, so that they'll be able to go through and what happened, what were you thinking, what have you thought about since, who's been affected by what you know, how they've been affected, and what do you think that needs to happen to make things right? And then you talk to the person who was victimized, and you talk, what did you think you realized wanted to happen? What impact has this incident had on you and others? What has been the hardest thing for you? And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? I do this with staff. When there's staff conflict, I do it with students. When there's student conflict, I do it with staff and student conflict. One of the things we've noticed is students, this is kind of making a mark when students are like, hey, Mr. John, can we do that circle thing that you do? And I ask the same questions every time, and we kind of go through it. And I know when they're asking for it, it's making a difference. Trust me, this took a while for our staff to buy into. Those questions aren't going to work. This is, it's very hard. It's easy to kind of push back. Once you're a part of a couple of these circles, you really start to realize that if you built a community like you thought you did, these circles help to repair some of the relationships when they're harmed. It's not going to work every time. And sometimes in the circles, when things are going astray, you have to stop the circle and go, look, you guys aren't ready for this. We need to stop this. It's not the time or the place. And that's happened too. I'm not naive enough to think it's going to work 100% of the time, all the time. But it is a really good tool that I've used over the past 5 years in regards to student relationships and staff relationships and everything in between. Small impromptu conversations. This encourages just that communication to be able to talk to students in a positive way, build relationships, and increase social awareness. Positive, using those affective statements, making sure that we're talking to the child or with the child, not to the child. There's a huge difference between saying, hey, take off your hat, and hey, I know it's a bummer, but school rules, take off their hats. Can you please take it off for me? I appreciate it. Like, those are two very different conversations. And so just using those teaching and practicing that is very important, because we're all not just going to do it naturally. It takes time. But catching each other on it too. Like, if I say something that's maybe punitive in nature, I hope one of my staff members like, wow, you're a little harsh there, don't you think? Like, it is holding each other accountable, because we're not going to be perfect all the time. But then for me not to be like offended and say things like, well, no, I didn't do that. Like, it's like, oh yeah, I can see what you're saying there. Like, maybe I didn't handle that situation as well as I could have. And then kind of that reflecting, was I in that 2 category? Was I in that not category? Was I in that 4 category? Or was I being restorative in that with category? So the 2 types of circles that we run at our school, one of the ways we build community is the community circle. I also build community, and our school does, not just me. I do birthday cards in the morning. We do song of the day on Fridays. We do different, we do quarterly things with our students, like assemblies, to get them excited, and with our character bucks and everything else. So we build community in a lot of ways. We do fun Fridays for students that have done different things and everything else. So it's a way to build relationships as a community circle within the classroom. So you have a talking piece and you give a prompt. Everyone has a voice. No one's more important than one another. But that's just one of the many ways you can build relationships and community within your schools. We do practice these a lot in both of the districts that I've worked in. And then the restorative circles, what I talked about earlier, with that the 2-sided question card, and working through conflict with, usually when there's one student who's committed an offense, and one student who is the victim in that situation. And then the formal conference, I have not done a lot of these. This is when you have more people involved. It's more of a formal thing. It takes a lot longer time. I have not personally been a part of a lot of these, but when the IARP talks about it, it's like a deeper repairing of what happened. This would be probably one of those things you do if there's a potential expulsion, pre-expulsion, and you felt like this was a good spot to do that. But it's something that would happen very infrequently, just because this isn't something that would be facilitated, consistently, because it would take a lot of pre-planning and post-planning, as well as, half hour, 45 minutes, hour, depending on everyone involved. Kind of a summary that I like to talk about with my staff. I think of restorative justice, restorative practices as this tree, and you look at all the different parts of the tree. We have that 7 core assumptions are the roots. We have the different branches, which are the conversation circles and conferences. We have the trunk, which is that self-care, checking in, social emotional learning, trauma-informed communication, all those types of things. We have our values, and then what are the fruits and leaves? The restorative outcomes. We have healing, relationships, and accountability, which is what we all want. This is just a real quick thing, and then I'll get to questions, I promise. There's a student, he has a heated argument with his parents before school. He's running late. Let's see the difference in what restorative policies can make compared to non. This is a very embellished example, I know that, but it's just like kind of a way to look. So the student arrives at school, greeted by metal detectors and a police search. He's then late to class. Gets yelled at in front of the class. He talks back, gets a detention. Now he's upset. He goes into the cafeteria. He's already, gets in all altercation and everything else, all those punitive things. Where if we can maybe change that a little bit, student walks in, hey, how's it going today? You need breakfast? What can we get for you? let's kind of rock and roll today. You know, you're a little behind schedule, but we're all right. We'll get you caught up. And then he's late. The teacher waits until after class. Hey, what's going on? Can we set up a meeting with your counselor? Like, we want to get you here. It's important for you to be here and learn. Maybe still gets into altercation. How do we mediate this? Maybe we use a restorative circle, we intervene, de-escalate the situation, and maybe repairs to do something within the confines of the school to put it in a better spot. So very just quick. It's not going to be this cut and dry. I understand that, but just the way of thinking about things, and it is hard. I'm not going to lie. Like, it's tough, especially when we get into situations where things are going astray and, things get chaotic in a school. It's harder to do this work because it takes more time and energy and everything else. But hopefully the proactive and doing the front work will make the back work a little less, and it's best for kids. Questions. And I know I talked a lot and I said a lot of things, so I apologize for that. I only had an hour. I could talk about this for days. So I'll open it up.
Nick, just going back a little bit in the chat, Dan had asked, instead of sharing slides, would it be possible to get a bibliography of resources?
Sure. And a lot of this stuff is just things I've kind of pulled from different things I've used, but I can try and get a lot of this stuff comes from the IARP, a lot of the science behind it. And that's why I reference them on everything. And that's why I don't feel comfortable sharing, because it is their kind of slide. Like, a lot of it's the slides that they've kind of produced. But being the trainer, I'm able to be able to share that with people. I just can't disseminate like the actual slideshow, if that makes sense.
Right.
So I can definitely get that the resource website for you, and then any of the other things that I've shown, I can get those to you as well.
That'd be great. And you send them to me, Calvin, or Nick, and I will send them on to the participants tomorrow.
Okay, perfect.
Calvin asks that he likes what he's seeing and hearing and would like to become a member. How much does it cost?
So we were fortunate enough, we partnered with our Greater Health Foundation, and we wrote a grant to take it. It is fairly expensive, but they do online trainings, which are a lot cheaper. So you can do have your team, instead of going to a spot. We've had people in our district, my current district, that I didn't take teams to, go to an online training or a day training or 2-day training through the IARP. It's the same thing. It's just a little quicker, and you'll get a lot of the same information. And that's a much more cost-effective strategy. I would say that the train the trainer is more expensive, but the nice thing is, if you have trainers in your school, they can train the rest of your system, and then you don't have to have as many people go to the other trainings, if that makes sense.
Yep, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions? Feel free to type in chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, just raise your hand with the toolbar at the bottom, and I can enable you to unmute if you'd like to ask something verbally. Calvin, thank you very much. All right, appreciate that. I don't see any other questions coming in. We've got plenty of time for Q&A though. I don't see any hands raised, so we're all good there. Agnes has just asked, are there any materials you would recommend on this topic?
I mean, there's a lot. I would say if there's one piece of advice I would give to anyone venturing into this work, it's to not depend on maybe one resource or one place, because I think the IARP does a phenomenal job of providing the science behind it and the framework. But I also know that my work with Rudy and kind of my mindset change and the constant being a practitioner of this work has helped me tremendously. There's a ton of good resources and books on it. Biggest thing is anything that builds community and anything that repairs harm is going to be your best bet.
Lauren just asked, our district tries to incorporate some reflective activities for specific behavior, especially offensive comments. Is there anything you can recommend for the consequence in addition to the restorative conversation?
So it all depends on your handbook, Lauren, but I would say things like, racial slurs and everything else is spelled out in our handbook pretty clearly. But there's a range of consequences, and how that would maybe look is if a student said a racial slur and, maybe a student was there that heard that, and there was both students were involved, were like, no, I want to have my voice heard and explain how that wasn't okay. And the other person's like, no, I shouldn't have said it and I want to repair that. Maybe the consequence itself is a little different. For example, maybe if your handbook states that it's a 2-day ISS or OSS for a racial slur that gets said, maybe that goes to a 1-day ISS or OSS if the restorative conversation happens, so that you're able to repair the relationship, rather than a kid just being out of class for an extra day and then coming back in and the relationship's still not repaired. So things like that, I think are important, but you have to know the intent behind the student, and you have to know, if it's the 17th time that a student said a racial slur, maybe that restorative, circle is not the option because it's not getting through. So I think it's so different each conversation, but I think all are very important to have.
And then Catherine says, as a classroom teacher, I found it so valuable to ask kids about their mornings, breakfast, etc. Creates a good relationship and starts their day off well.
100%. I would say we've incorporated that at our elementary schools, morning community circles. We do it in pockets at our middle school. The high school has done it. It's a way to get kids to realize that you're there for them, and making sure that their basic needs are met before you dive into any of the curricular. I mean, the schools have such a difficult job in regards to we have to teach all of the standards and do all the different things. But we also have to make sure that our kids are fundamentally okay and that their basic needs are being met. So I think that's phenomenal, Catherine. I would agree that would be a great practice in the morning.
And Catherine just followed up that she's in the high school building, and they appreciate that I ask and care how they're doing.
I think that's important, because I think a lot of times as we grow through, K through 5, we do a really good job of maybe holistically taking care of the student. And I think some of that gets lost in translations 6 through 12, not because we don't care, but it's because, the rigor of the curriculum gets so great that we feel like we have this, we got to keep going. We got to keep going. We got to get to teach the, so they understand it for the tests or the AP classes or whatever it is. But taking that time, I think, is extremely important, and it'll benefit the students in the long run.
All right, excellent. I don't see any other questions for you, Nick, but you feel free to raise your hand or type into the chat in our last few moments together. Nick, if you want to give them contact information,
yep,
that would be great, and then we will wrap up.
Sounds good. Here's my contact information there. That's my school email. Feel free to reach out. This is extremely important work. I really, truly believe in it. I think it does make a difference. Just how we talk to kids. And like I said, it's hard. Sometimes it's very difficult to be able to do these things. But I do think it's a great way to kind of just keep making the school environment a better place.
Wonderful. We really appreciate your time this afternoon, Nick, and all these strategies for dealing with restorative practices. Thank you to our attendees as well. Like I said, I'll be following up tomorrow with an email. It'll have a link to the recording, to Nick's references document. And then for Illinois participants, you will get the ISB evaluation. And once you complete that, you'll get the ISB evidence of completion form for getting 1 professional development clock hour for attending the webinar today. Thanks, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate everyone joining. Thank you very much.